Salutations, fam. This is Dark Slayer Arim from Tessia Gaming, and in today's video, going to be continuing the deck builder series thing. So yeah, one of the thing I wanted to talk about in today's video was kind of like understanding like what type of deck you're building. One of the common mistakes I see when people are like deck building is I see them like build and not really commit to the deck type they're trying to build. Like they'll build a combo deck, or they'll be trying to build a combo deck, but then they'll like throw in like a bunch of hand traps, or like they'll throw in like back row or whatever. And what that does is you end up losing out on the benefits of a combo deck. And that's basically what like I see people try to do, is that they try to get around the fact that every deck type has its own strengths and weaknesses by like, you know, they'll be like, oh, well, if blah, blah, blah happens, then I have this potentially. But when you deck build in that manner, what you end up doing is that like, you end up with just a weaker deck overall, because you lose out on the strengths of your deck type, in that like, you know, you'll have like less of the strength because you're not fully committed to building around that strength. But then you'll also have like, you know, the weaknesses of the other deck type that you're like building into, basically. So like real quick, I want to go over like the different types of decks there are. So you got like aggro decks, control decks, stun decks, mid-range decks, and combo decks, right? And the thing about it is that each of these decks will be able to see success. Each of these decks have their own strengths and weaknesses. And in reality, there is no like, oh, this is just objectively the best way to build a deck. Like, no, each deck type has their own strengths and weaknesses. Blue Eyes is like weird in that like, it can be built as each of these deck types. Like you can build an aggro Blue Eyes deck, a control Blue Eyes deck, a Blue Eyes stun deck, a mid-range deck, a combo deck. You can build it as each of them. But like, you have to know which type you are building so that you actually like follow the deck building rules of each of those types. So real quick, I want to like talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each deck type and kind of explain what they are. So aggro decks. Aggro decks want to steamroll the opponent, basically. They're constantly throwing haymakers at you until the opponent runs out of answers to the haymakers. These are like, if you're like a Yugioh boomer like me, this is like your old school beatdown deck. They can't trap hole everything. They can't Sakuretsu everything. You know, if you keep normal summoning the big bunguses, they're eventually going to run out of answers to the big bunguses, and then eventually you're going to like beat over them and whatnot, right? These are the decks that are playing, you know, a bunch of removal and board breaker cards. They're very commonly OTK decks. They just constantly like put pressure and aggression on the board, and that's like their win condition, you know? Yeah, like a modern day example of this would be like Dino, for example. Dino's an aggro deck. One real quick thing. A lot of times, yes, people will like combine two deck types, but it's just like, you have to understand like how to build if you're like building like and combining two deck types, right? But back to the aggro deck, right? So like in context of like Blue Eyes, for example, these are like the blind second OTK Blue Eyes decks, like the Danger aggro deck, right? The Chaos Max OTK deck, those are aggro decks. What is the downside of playing an aggro deck? Well, obviously the benefit is that like, eventually your opponent will run out of answers to the aggression, then usually they will not be able to put up enough, you know, stuff to handle the aggression, right? They're not going to be able to stop like the lightning storm, the droplet, blah blah. They're not going to be able to stop everything. But the downside to the aggro deck is that they're very linear, right? One of the things about aggro decks is you make them go first, and then like, because they're so hyper focused on like blinding second, breaking boards and things like that, they're typically going to be in a much less advantageous position if they have to go first, right? Because they're playing all these board breakers, they're less likely to have an extender to like play through the interruption and things like that, right? Because that's what the board breakers are for. They're there to force out your opponent's interruption, and then you like, you know, pile on the aggression to then like, you know, break their board and like take control of the game that way. So like, in regard to like the Chaos Max deck, for example, right? That deck is really good at just like OTKing you out of nowhere. But if they don't OTK you, they typically lose the game because like their ability to put up interruption. Because the thing is, a lot of aggro decks will still be able to put up interruption because that's just like the nature of modern Yu-Gi-Oh nowadays. But like typically it's going to be a very linear interruption. They're not going to be able to like put up a very strong board or very versatile board. So if they have to go first, they typically are going to lose. If they, you know, don't OTK you, they're typically going to lose. But yeah, moving on to control decks. Control decks are decks that want to like win by 1,000 cuts, basically. They're typically going to be those decks that like they want to do something like they do something every turn, but it's not going to be like crazy. These are usually like trap decks and things like that. Trap decks are going to be the ones that like they have a more heavy focus on like trap cards and things like that. The benefit of like trap decks is that most decks are going to be built around like monster decks and like spell effects and things like that. So trap decks very frequently are going to be like able to skirt under the meta. They're going to be like those anti-meta picks, you know. Now usually you'll have two different directions with control decks. It's very rare that like people are just going to be playing like 40 trap cards. That's very rare, right? Typically they're either going to be more so leaning into like mid-range control or like stun control. So like with a stun deck, right, they're going to be like, those are the floodgate decks. Those are the decks that are specifically built to like hard counter, you know, the top decks of the format, right? The mid-range decks, you know, those are going to be the decks that are like, mid-range decks typically are like the jack of all trades deck. They're not doing anything like super overwhelming, but they're going to be able to like do that like turn after turn after turn. Mid-range decks are usually decks that are playing like, you know, like 12, 15, 18 hand traps and things like that. Mid-range decks tend to be built around like one card engines and things like that. Like for example, Prank Kids is a mid-range deck. Blue Eyes can be built as a mid-range deck. Invoked is a mid-range deck. Tri-Brigade is a mid-range deck. You know, a lot of decks actually are mid-range decks nowadays. It's why it's a very popular deck type to build but the thing about like a mid-range deck, for example, is that like typically good mid-range decks are going to be built around like those one-card engines, and that's why they can get away with running like, you know, 18 hand traps, because it doesn't matter if like 4 cards in your hand are not like play starters or engine enablers. If those you have the 1 card starter, right? It doesn't matter if you have, you know, 4 hand traps in your hand if you have the Alistair to be able to make your Mechaba, because and that's basically the idea behind it. They put up, you know, their thing, they set up their board, and they have like follow up for next turn. So it's like their board plus follow up for next turn, right? Blue Eyes is very well equipped to be a mid-range deck because like Stone of Ancients summons you a Blue Eyes, but then the Stone of Ancients also adds back a Blue Eyes. So it gives you that like play and then follow up for next turn. And then like also like if you use the stone for a synchro play, it summons a Blue Eyes in the end phase and things like that. But yeah, like going towards combo decks. So combo decks want to snowball the opponent out of the game by generating all of its resources, you know, turn 1. It just generates it all at once. And these are the type of decks that usually win on the first turn, basically, right? They're those decks that build those unbreakable boards. They, you know, FDKs or whatever they're doing, but they're going to like just kind of snowball you out of the game turn 1. What is the weakness of this deck? They will usually not have a follow-up. The thing about these type of decks is that, yeah, they build the unbreakable board, but if you do break the board, they have like no follow-up whatsoever, because like they've gone through their entire extra deck, they've summoned all their monsters out the main deck, they have like very little to no follow-up, you know, after that turn 1. Yeah, it's like, so like a good example of, you know, like a combo deck, for example, is that like you have like Dragon Link, for example, like Blue Eyes Dragon Link with the Dragoonity stuff, for example. You're gonna put up a board with 4 interruptions, and then you have like game on board with those interruptions, because it's just like 4 negates that have like 3k attack or something, right? But if your opponent Dark Rulers like hit you with the Spear mode or a Dark Ruler or whatever, you just kind of lose the game basically because you have no follow-up. But yeah, like I said, like it's not uncommon for like decks to be like multiple types. There's a lot of aggro combo decks. There's a lot of mid-range control decks. There's a lot of stun control decks. There's a lot of, you know, there's mid-range combo decks and things like that, right? But yeah, that kind of. Oh, so talking about like the deck types that you usually wouldn't want to like synergize into, because the thing about a combo deck and it being able to like snowball you out of the game by generating all of its resources at once is that, you know, typically these are the decks that like once they start going, it's impossible to stop, right? An example of like Blue Eyes, like, yeah, if you stop the save and like stop that search, you stop them from getting playing, you know, you're going to win the game. But once they start playing, it just becomes so hard to stop, because, you know, you can, if you don't ash the sage and they search the stone, then all of a sudden when you like ash the cards of consonants, they still get to add the Blue Eyes and then activate the trade-in, and then the trade-in turn, even if you ash the trade-in, then the Blue Eyes is engraved to turn on the Return of the Dragon Lords and blah 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 blah, right? So it's just like, it's one of those things where it's just like, if you stop one thing, you can't really stop them, because like that play sets up another play, and it just kind of like creates that snowball effect, right? And if you're not stopping anything, then, you know, that snowball is even more extreme, because you're creating this scenario where like, you know, that you're just generating way more advantage. Like, think about Dragon Link, for example, with if you start with like Chaos Space pitching, you know, Absterrouter with Noctivision in hand, right? It's like, sure, you can ask the Chaos Space, but then the Absterrouter will search a rocket, for example. Or it's like, you know, you get the baby Chaos Dragon, and then you summon it and you link off for Striker Dragon. Then you're like Chain Link 1, Striker Dragon, Chain Link 2, Chaos Dragon, Chain Link 3, Noctivision. It's like, sure, you can stop one thing, but then it's just like you're just generating and snowballing so much advantage that it's just so hard to like really stop them. And it's like, it creates a scenario where every time you like interact with them, you're losing like 1 card, but they get like 3 in return. And the thing about like combo decks is that you want to be playing like extenders, because one of the things I see people do when they build combo decks is they'll build it to be like this really consistent, you know, at doing the combo, but they're like weak to hand traps because they're not playing extenders. They have like a bunch of starters and a bunch of ways to start their play, but they don't have extenders to keep playing after they get like, if they get interrupted on the starter, you know? This is like a weakness of the standard Blue Eyes deck, quote unquote. Like I actually made a video about this. It's one of my other videos. And actually, you know what? I'll link it in the description. But basically, you want to be playing extenders in combo decks. You don't want to like overload the deck with hand traps. Typically, if I'm building a combo deck, I'm not gonna play more than 6 hand traps, because again, you don't want to try and like have everything in your deck, because then you just kind of lose what makes that deck type strong. The thing about like you know, a combo deck that makes it strong is its ability to play through interruption. If you're like, you know, bloating the deck with a bunch of hand traps, then you lose access to that, because like if I get ashed on a like the Sage, for example, a hand trap isn't going to help me continue my combo, right? And you might think like, oh, but it's like, if you get, you know, stopped on your combo, then the hand trap will allow you to interrupt your opponent during their turn, so that it potentially rolls back into your turn. But like, if you, sure, that would be true, but like sometimes, but most of the time, like, you're not actually going to be able to capitalize off of what your deck does. And like, if you have like a bunch of starters and you don't have any extenders, you're not going to be able to have like a handful of like playable cards, which is what like combo decks are known for, is that like they just kind of keep playing through the hand traps, and that's like the big thing, is playing through interruption. Yeah, having like a hand trap will allow you to have interruption, but so would having an extender to keep comboing through that hand trap. Like similarly, like overcommitting to cards that like stop hand traps versus having an extender. Like a good example would be like, let's say you're playing like the Hout combo deck, right? So let's say I have, you know, Sage plus Called By in my hand, right? That is 2 interruptions if everything goes through, right? It's 1 interruption if my opponent has the hand trap, right? Now, let's look at, say, having an extender in that situation, right? If I go normal Sage and they Ash the Sage, I don't get that effect Veiler, but that extender will allow me to make the Halki Fibrax, which will translate into a Baron de Fleur, which will still be 1 interruption if they have that hand trap, right? And if they don't have the hand trap, it is still 2 interruptions because I'll have the Baron de Fleur plus the effect Veiler. But the difference between the two is that like I'll also have my engine in rotation, right? Because the Baron de Fleur is a lot better to have than like a Called By the Grave, for example. It's a lot better to have than a hand trap, because the Baron de Fleur has actual monster presence on the board. If you do your combo, you'll have like the Blue Eyes Abyss Dragon, and you know, or like the Blue Eyes Jet Dragon, you'll actually have like your Blue Eyes engine in rotation, right? You know, having access to, you know, the Link Karibo to actually like protect you from like attacks and everything like that, you know? Having the Halki Fibrax that can turn into the Formula Synchron to like draw you a card. It's just like you're going to get way more value out of actually like doing your combo than getting like interrupted on the starter and just like passing or something like that with like 1 hand trap. You would rather have an extender to do your combo through the hand trap than, you know, you would, you know, having like a hand trap or like a, you know, something else, right? Because again, it's like you have that monster presence and you're just generating too much advantage for that single hand trap to stop you. And when your deck is full of hand traps, a lot of times you'll still be able to get to your combo anyway, right? And if they don't have hand traps, this will allow you to build just like a much bigger board, right? So that's why you don't like want to like bloat your combo deck with like a bunch of hand traps, because you want to be able to like do your combo through the hand trap. You want to be playing extenders to do your combo through the hand trap. Talking about like mid-range decks. So with a mid-range decks are typically going to be the ones that are built around like actually going back to combos. So like a good example of like a combo Blue Eyes deck is like obviously there's the Halki Fibrax Turbo list that I've been playing, and I've done well with at tournaments with that one. There's obviously the Chaos Blue Eyes deck. That's a good example of like, you know, a combo deck. It's basically like Chaos Roller Turbo, and you just generate advantage full of extenders and things like that. And yeah, but moving on to like mid-range deck. What are mid-range decks built around? If you remember, I said like they're typically like the 1-card combo decks. Those are the decks that, hold up. So typically like 1-card, you know, combo decks are typically going to have like 1-card starters and things like that, right? So like Alistair the Invoker, Magical Meltdown, these are 1-card starters. Right? So Artemis and Secure Gardener, right? With the Almirage, Mechaba. So this is a good like mid-range engine, right? So the thing about this engine is that 1-card engine, it sets you up for your engine plus like follow-up basically, right? So if you normal summon Alistair, you get the Invocation, which is your fusion spell, right? Right. So you pick up your fusion spell, and then you will link off the normal summon Alistair in either an Artemis or then into an Almirage and then Secure Gardener. Then you have the Alistair Engrave plus your light monster to then fusion summon with Invocation for your Mechaba. Then you use Invocation effect Engrave, you add back the Alistair, and then your Mechaba has a live monster negate. But if you don't use that negate, then you have follow-up for next turn, because you can just normal summon the Alistair, do the same thing again next turn. So basically, you know, it's a one-card engine, one-card starters. Now, what's the downside to a thing like this? Let's say you have, you know, you don't want to like fill it up with a bunch of starters, so to speak. And this is why you actually play like hand traps and such like that, because you don't really get value from having like a bunch of normal summons in your hand, right? You can only normal summon once per turn outside of like very specific cards that give you an extra normal summon. And like, you know, you can only do the whole invocation recycle thing once per turn anyway. So like, if you normal summon Alistair, you get that interruption plus follow-up. And then from there, you just want to have like either another supplementary one card engine and things like that, or you want to have like hand traps. It doesn't matter if my hand is 4 hand traps if the 5th card is, you know, my 1 card enabler. In regards to Blue Eyes, 1 card engine enabler, and that's the thing, like 1 card engine. So Dragon Ravine, this is 1 card. This gets your Blue Eyes engine in rotation. This puts the Stone of Ancients in rotation. This gets you access to Blue Eyes White Dragon with 1 card. Fusion Deployment. Fusion Deployment. This just says special summon the Blue Eyes from the deck. 1 card. Your engine's in rotation. You have your boss monster. Dragon Shrine. Same thing. Sends the Stone of Ancients to the deck. Gets your engine in rotation, and then, you know, you're off to the races. So each of these cards are all like 1 card engine enablers that give you access to a boss monster. 1 card engines don't necessarily always put up negation, but they more so focus on getting your engine in rotation. And then you like will have like your supplementary stuff sometimes, and like you can have like your 1 card, like multiple 1 card engines together, and just like have like a mid-range deck. So for example, like Eldritch, that is, you know, their back row, but it is actually a mid-range engine. So like a single conch, you know, gets you the Sanguine, and then the Sanguine gets you the Golden Lore, and then the, you know, you just kind of keep looping between the two, and then it's just like 1 single Eldritch Trap gets the engine in rotation. 1 single Dragon Shrine gets the Blue Eyes engine in rotation. 1 single Alistair gets the Invoked engine in rotation. You know, Nadir Servant. Ecclesia, like, you know, 1 resolution of these gets the engine in rotation. In the context of like, you know, you wouldn't necessarily like play all of this together. And just a quick disclaimer, the purpose of the deck building guides isn't to tell you like play this deck list. It's more so to say like these are fundamental like concepts that you should consider when you are like building a deck list. So yeah, that's talking about like mid-range decks a bit. We'll move on to like stun decks. So like stun decks, those are the decks where, isn't there like a button where I can just like, yeah, there we go. So stun decks, these are the floodgate decks. You know, that always happens. You just kind of load up on floodgates. These are the decks that are focused around stopping the opponent from playing. Right? They are specifically built around countering a core game mechanic. Right? Right? So basically the idea with these decks is that these are going to be decks that hard counter the meta decks of the format. These are anti-meta decks. They are built around like, you know, like let's say right now, what are the best decks in the format? You have all the Brave decks, right? Adventurer Engine is a bunch of stuff that has different attributes. So Ghost and Match shuts those decks down completely. There's a lot of like decks in the format that require you to have like, you know, graveyard stuff. Macrocosmos shuts those decks down completely. So like a good example of like an anti-meta deck that you could build right now would be like Macro Beat, right? So like Gozen, Macro, Dim Fizz, these are all decks that will like completely shut your opponent out. Yeah, that's like the idea, is you're playing stuff that like hard counters your the meta decks of the format, right? The downside to deck like these is that, again, they are anti-meta decks. They are very, very, very targeted in regards to what they counter. If you play against something that isn't, you know, one of the meta decks, like you're playing against like something that isn't as effective, so to speak, these decks would typically do very, very poorly, for example, right? Another thing about these decks is that typically they kind of struggle going second because you have to be able to establish your floodgate, and you can't really do that if your opponent's already built their board, right? For example, I see the difference. But anyway, so like with something like Summon Limit, if I go first and I set Summon Limit and Macro, right? This will completely hose like a meta combo deck, right? That's trying to like play, because they were not going to be able to establish any pressure. And most combo decks, like, they won't have anything that they can just like normal summon to deal with like a Thunder King, right? And they'll need to be able to like search and all this other stuff, and they just kind of fold to stuff like this, right? But if they've already done their combo, then a card like Summon Limit, Macro, Thunder King, they don't do anything because they've already got their combo piece on the board. They can't combo further, but they don't need to because they've already got their boss monster on the board. They've already got their, like, you know, board of, like, you know, a bunch of boss monsters with 3k attack and, like, Omni Negates and things like that, right? So at that point, they can just kind of, like, not care, and they can just, like, go to battle and kill you. And usually, you know, you'll fold and things like that. So yeah, that's, like, how stun decks work. This is like a good example of a stun deck. As I mentioned, aggro decks. Just press the button. So like aggro decks. So like I mentioned, Dino, these are the decks that are just like all about breaking boards and like putting on the pressure, OTKing, applying a bunch of damage, things like that. Obviously the Chaos Max deck is a good example of this, because it's like you play... These are basically the decks that, like, main deck, you know, like Board Breakers. They're main deck in Lightning Storm. They're main deck in Droplet. They're, you know, they're main deck in the Board Breaker card. They're main deck in Kaijus and things like that. Yeah, so what is the thing about these decks? You know, you got a main deck Board Breaker card. You typically want to go second because you need that 6th card to be able to, you know, get the card advantage. You're going to want to be playing cards that generate you positive card advantage. Hold up. There we go. There we go. So, like, extra desires. These are cards that generate your card advantage on +1. That give you those extra cards you'll need to be able to break your opponent's boards and things like that. You're not really playing, like, hand traps in these type of decks. Typically, people will think that, oh, because I'm blinding second, I want to play hand traps. No, you want to be playing board breakers. Because, again, you're not really trying to, like, interrupt your opponent and then like build a board, so to speak. Like, you know, some of them will, but like the main thing is you're trying to break their board and then kill them that turn. You know, the thing is, sure, like like let's put it like this: an Imperm on an Alistair will stop them from getting to the Mechaba, but a Chalice or a Droplet will also, like, it'll force out that Mechaba. And also, funnily enough, Imperm on the Mechaba too will force out that Mechaba. It'll turn it off for that turn, but then they've also committed those extra resources, and then you can actually like get rid of the Mechaba and things like that. So these are the decks that'll be like main decking stuff like this, right? They'll be main decking like Kaijus, right? They'll be main decking the Kaijus so that they can like tribute over and break the board and things like that. Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, board breakers, and things like that. Aggro decks really will need that 6th card, because again, these type of decks are playing like a lot of like blind second cards that don't really have much value going first, and so they want to be able to actually like have a chance to like facilitate like their combo that killed you or things like that, right? So yeah, that's gonna kind of like talk about the different deck types. So now I'm gonna kind of like go into like, let me see how long this video is. Oh my gosh, we're already at 30 minutes. So much information. So I probably am not gonna have time to like go over each deck type, but I'll kind of like just go over each deck type, explain what kind of deck they are, and like kind of go from there, if that makes sense, right? So yeah. So in regards to like Master Duel, so let's start with Stun. So again, this is an anti-meta deck. Now funnily enough, like this isn't like super good, because one of the top decks and one of the expected decks that you expect to play against is like a stun deck itself, being that you have Eldritch and they are playing like the Floodgates and things like that. So cards like Goes and Match, cards like Skill Drain don't really do anything to those decks, but thankfully Eldritch is not like one of the like big threats. One of the big threats is like you know, like Drytron, Tri-Brigade, Adamanticators, right? So those decks will tend to have a hard time against cards like Goes and Match and Skill Drain. These are the cards that like you flip these up, they just kind of lose the game. One of the things about control/stun decks is that like you're not so much playing hand traps, right? If you do, you're only playing like specifically like the high impact hand traps. And just in general, this also applies to combo decks. If you're playing hand trap, you're playing like the high impact turn ending hand traps like Maxi, Nibiru, Drollin Lockbird, Lancia, right? You're playing like the high impact hand traps. These are the cards that like they're hand traps, yes, but they like end the player's turn and things like that. Or Dimension Shifter. Hold up. Again, the purpose of these videos isn't necessarily to say play this deck list. It's more so to explain like the concept behind the deck list and things like that, right? So like in regards to a stun Blue Eyes deck, you're basically playing a very minimal engine to like put the vanilla on board, keep it there, and then like flood your opponent out with like floodgates and things like that, right? And the thing about these floodgates is that you don't actually care about these floodgates because you're not affected by it at all, right? You're not just specifically playing floodgates. So, and like another thing you could play in this is like Summon Limit, for example. That's a floodgate that you wouldn't really be that affected by. Now the reason why I usually don't play floodgates like this is because like they don't really do much going second, whereas like Skill Drain and Gozen actually do like shut down the opponent's board going second. And my opponent has like a big combo board full of like monster negates and spell negates that got like Appaloosa and like Appaloosa, Crystal Wing, VFD, you know, just like this big board of like monster negates. Then a card like Goes and a card like Skill Drain shuts that deck down because, you know, they don't have that much to like deal with a like trap card, for example. And then like, you know, Solemn Strike to be able to just negate the one negate anyway, and then they can't respond to a counter trap. Oh, actually that's one of the benefits of playing like trap deck, is that you get to play counter traps, and like you can only respond to a counter trap with another counter trap. So typically, like even if they do have that board of like negation, flipping up like Gozen plus Strike or Skill Drain plus Strike will just like turn off the board, and then you just immediately take control of the game because you have like your big bungus that just kind of like attacks over everything. But yeah, control deck, decked by 1,000 cut. Now you'll notice I'm playing a floodgate, but I'm not playing as many floodgates. You know, I'm playing the Skill Drain because this like hits a lot of decks in the format. I'm playing like, you know, hand traps and Maxi because again, this is a high impact hand traps that's going to draw me into like my back row, my floodgates, and my like one card engines and things like that. This is a mid-range control deck. You know, you're playing the one card engines, you're playing like the Nadir, the Ecclesia. The thing about the Dogmatica engine is this gets you interruption plus follow-up. This searches you punishment. Punishment sends Reflecia. Reflecia searches you fusion deployment, so you have the fallout for next turn. Stone of Ancients gives you your Blue Eyes, and then, you know, adds back the Blue Eyes. Nadir, same thing as like the Dogmatica engine, and then you just have like your back row and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of like going over that. I think this is a combo deck. Yeah, this is a combo deck. You'll notice, I don't think I'm playing any hand traps in this one. This is a combo deck. It's full of extenders. So the thing is, like, your opponent's not going to stop you with a single Ash Blossom. A lot of times, like, Nib's not going to be enough either. Because you'll notice, like, I'm just playing, like, a bunch of extenders. So it's like, you have, your play starter, which will be, like, your starters. You'll have, like, the Sire Reflectors, E-Tellies, Sage with Eyes of Blue. And you're basically trying to make a level 8 Synchro in the Chaos Ruler. Chaos Ruler is just then going to, like, excavate a bunch of cards. And then from there, if you didn't already have a bunch of extenders, you're going to have a bunch of extenders. It's going to be just really, really, really hard to stop you at this point. E-Telly is a card that serves as both a starter and an extender, because you can use this to summon Sire Reflector, get access to your Chaos Ruler, and start your plays. Or you can already be playing E-Telly out this package and then, you know, do the play like that. Danger is just say activate special, draw, and then, you know, cards that are starters or extenders, you can use these to get your play started, or you can use these as you're already playing. Because this deck is full of extenders, it's, you know, going to be a thing where you can just kind of like play through a lot of boards if they're like weaker boards. If they're not having floodgates, you're gonna play through their board. You're gonna be able to like play through their board, break their board, and then like, you know, build your board, or like potentially OTK them. Because like the thing about this deck is that like, and well, this is the thing about Blue Eyes in general, is that like your monsters are all kind of like 3k, or they're all huge, so usually you can just kind of attack over a lot of stuff and kill your opponent. Because this one is an aggro, this one is like a combo deck specifically, you're not really playing hand traps, you're not really like playing those blind second cards, but because of the nature of it being a combo deck and having all these extenders and such, you're going to be able to just kind of like play through stuff. You're going to be able to just like, oh, they have an Ash Blossom. I can't tell you how many times on Master Duel somebody has Ashed a Danger, and then I've just been like, okay, anyway, activate Danger because they're not once per turn. And just in general, like you'll notice I'm playing a lot of cards that are not once per turn, and like if they are once per turn, I'm typically only playing like one copy of it. Like Cosmo Rains are once per turn, so I'm playing one Creator, one Gizmek Orochi, one Alternative, one Levy. These are all like cards, like, you know, one Emperor. These are cards that are like hard once per turn. Astral Karibo is like a unique exception in that like it's it is a hard once per turn. I'm playing more than one of it, but it's just because this card is just so strong. It just specials itself for free, and then the Ixies monster you get happens to get that protection effect. The thing about Astral Karibo is you would play this card even if this wasn't here, but it's just that because this is here, you end up playing 3 of it because it's just so strong. The thing about this combo deck is that like Nib is almost never going to be a factor unless you're super greedy. It's very rare that you lose to Nib because like you can always either make Nib on the 3rd, or like is either making on the 3rd summon or the 5th summon. Because if you don't just go level 8 extender, make number 90, right? Where is number 90? And you just make number 90, that's your monster negate for your Nib. You're going to be able to make your Chaos Ruler, right? So it's typically going to be your 1, your 7, Chaos Ruler, an 8, and then the 5th summon will be number 90. And then you just kind of keep playing from there with your extenders and things like that. Yeah. So now that's like the combo version of this deck. Now, funnily enough, like the aggro version of the deck is basically the same deck, same concept, but you're main decking like the board breakers and the back row removal and like the, you know, the pot card and all that stuff. You're playing like the blind second cards, right? It's still like a similar concept. You're still playing like Chaos Ruler Turbo, but because, you know, of the type of deck it is, it's a blind second deck, you're more so focused on like breaking the board and OTKing your opponent. So it's like you're playing a lot of those like cards that are strong, like going second. You're playing like the Shuda, you're playing like the 7, so it's like you're going to be able to play like Dark Arm, this like pops cards, the Vishuda, you know, you make the monk and then it bounces cards and things like that. If you have like a normal monster on board, and you're typically going to be able to do that. You have the access to the Chaos Ruler to get you access to like your extenders and such, and you know, you just have all these blind second cards and things like that, right? And then honestly, I kind of want to just make a video specifically talking about the Chaos Mech deck, because that one's really like its own kind of video. In regards like to the mid-range deck, in the context of Master Duel, it's going to function a lot different than it would in the TCG, because the thing about Master Duel is you don't, like, summoning a singular, like, Blue Eyes isn't really that much of a payoff. So it's like, you know, playing like a one card engine that summon Blue Eyes, you would still play these cards, but they're not like as big of a thing, you know? So this one you're just playing like multiple one card engine, but you'll notice that you're only playing like one normal summon basically, right? So one card that like needs the normal summon, so, and that's like the invoked engine. The rest of the stuff, even though they're one card starters, they don't actually use your normal summon, right? Like the Stone of Ancients, you can pitch it, send it off Dragon Shrine, or you can keep it in hand to pitch off your Mechaba and things like that, right? And it's, you know, a mid-range deck that, you know, you are playing your hand shot, you're playing like your Maxi and your Ash, but you're also playing like Droplet, because like this is just like a unique going second card, and that like if you have it going first, you can still set it and things like that. But yeah, it's just like mid-range deck. You have these a bunch of one card engines that you will use to be able to get that interruption plus follow-up. I don't really care if my hand is like, you know, Maxi, Ash, Droplet, Called By, if I have one of these one card starters. And the thing about these particular one card starters is that you can actually all like use them all like in conjunction with each other. So if I have Alistair, Ecclesia, Dragon Shrine, and then like, you know, hand traps or whatnot, I can actually use all of those and like have everything in rotation as well. What are we looking like on time? We are 40 minutes. Oh my gosh. Shoot. And then combo. Is this the right one? It is. So I actually do not like the Synchro combo Blue Eyes build as much, because it is so many ultra rares for one. It's so many ultras. But also, it's just not as good as it is in the TCG, because you don't have, you know, a lot of the payoffs that you have in the TCG. You still have, like, pretty much, like, all of the Synchro 9 pulls. You have some of the 10s, but you don't have, like, the big thing that makes, like, playing this deck in the TCG is good, which is, like, Baron de Fleur. You don't have access to this. You do have some 10s. You have, White Aura Behemoth. You have this card, which is really good. And then you have the Ready Rose. You have Ready Rose, and you have Ascension. You have Ascension Sky Dragon. These are like the 10 sinkers you go into, but it's just like they're just so bad in comparison to Baron de Fleur. And it's like you can't still play this, it's still good, but it's just like, oh man, every time I play this deck, I'm just like, man, I wish I could go into Baron de Fleur here. And also a thing about the Synchro combo build in Master Duel is that you have to play the Mausoleum engine instead of like the Dictator engine in the that you will be playing in the TCG, which is still like good, but it's just like it's just so much worse than the TCG. It's still good, it's still competitively viable, but it just makes me so sad because every time I play this deck, I'm just like, man, I wish I could summon a Baron de Fleur here. Man, wish I could go Dictator effect here, you know? Because one of the weaknesses of the build before we got Dictator was that if you drew Abyss Dragon, your combo just became so much weaker because you don't really have another Blue Eyes monster that you want to play. And because you're not playing the Dictator engine, like you typically, like if you draw Abyss Dragon, you're typically not going to have a Blue Eyes monster to summon at the end of the turn, you know? But yeah, it's like you still have like a lot of the same strength. It's still like a really good deck. And you still have like 2-card combos, variable 2-card combos. You can still load the deck up with starters and extenders. It's still a really consistent deck, but it's just like, man, I cannot wait for them to add Baron de Fleur. Once we get Baron de Fleur, I'll probably play this deck more. But for right now, I'm probably just playing like Chaos Blue Eyes because like I just have like everything for this deck in Master Duel. Well, I don't actually have it in my Master Duel account, but like all of the cards for the deck are in the game, at least, is what I'm getting at. But yeah. So yeah, honestly, I think, so real quick, pile decks, 60 card decks. So one of the deck building fundamentals is that like you want to play as close to 40 cards as possible. The thing is, there are rules, and then there are exceptions to the rules. But the thing is, you have to know the rules to know how to break the rules, okay? So the thing about it is that you almost always want to play as small of a deck size as possible. But there are very specific exceptions where you would want to play a higher than 40 deck size. That specific exception is when you have cards in your deck that you don't want to draw, okay? That is the exception where you would play higher than 40 cards, right? And depending on how many of those cards you play, that determines how much higher than 40 cards you want to get. So, if you're playing like a bunch of cards you don't want to draw, you would want to play, you know, a higher deck size to facilitate that. But the thing is, if you play a higher than 40 deck size, you're going to like lose out on consistency, so you have to make other changes to facilitate it. And the changes that you usually make is that you play more starters, more starter cards, more extenders, to accommodate it, right? So, hold up. Let me go ahead and pull up the probability calculator so we can talk about that. So let me pull that up real quick. Alrighty, now I've got the probability calculator pulled up. So here's the thing. When it comes to like building a deck, you want to have like, you know, consistency in opening your plays and things like that. So you want to have between 11 to 14 starters. Well, you can have more than that, but you typically want to have around 11 to 14 like play starters in a 40 card deck. But what does that actually translate to? 11 starters in a 40 card deck is around an 80% chance to opening starter, you know, a starter in your opening hand, right? So if you open that up to 60, what does that actually translate to? If we go up to 60 and we're only playing 11 starters, suddenly that drops to 65%. That's less than 70%. That's, you know, we're gonna start, you know, breaking. Now, let's go to a 40 card deck once again. Let's say I have 5 garnets in my deck that I don't want to draw. Alright, in a 40 card deck, if I got 5 garnets in there, you see that? That's a 50% chance that I'm going to open one of those garnets. That is literally half of my games, and I'm going to open one of those garnets. So we don't want to like be open. It doesn't matter if we open a starter if we like draw the garnet and we can't do the combo anymore, right? So look at 60 cards. Now all of a sudden it's way down to 30%. That's still like a pretty decent chance that you'll open one, but it's significantly lower. Now, what do we have to do to maintain the consistency of opening starter cards? So let's bump that up to like 17. I'm surprised I got that off the top of my head. You know, it's because I've played 60 card decks before. But so 17 cards gives us around the same amount of chance of opening a starter. So if we increase the amount of starters / extenders that we're playing to as we go up to 60 cards, we end up in a scenario where, you know, we're not actually like decreasing our deck's consistency, and we're actually increasing it because we have actually a higher chance to open a starter at 60 cards, but now we have, you know, only like a 36, I think it was like 36% chance to open one of those garnets, right? We've significantly lowered our chance to open a garnet when we significantly increased our chance to open a start. Well, not significantly increased, but we're around the same, you know, chance. And the thing is, if you can actually like, you know, depending on type of deck, typically what I'll do if I'm like going up to 60 cards is I'll typically either, depending on type of deck, if it's like a mid-range deck, I'll increase the amount of, you know, hand traps I'm playing or the amount of extenders I'm playing if it's a combo deck. And as you saw in the deck screenshot, I was playing like a lot of like extenders and whatnot, right? But yeah, that's going to be like a little brief primer on, you know, the different deck types and things like that. I didn't really have time to like go in depth about how to build like each deck, because like I said, like there's just so much information. I don't want to make like 3-hour videos, and this one's already coming up on an hour. But that's gonna be it for this video. I'm gonna have some links in the description. I'm gonna have a link to the probability calculator. I'm gonna have a link to my other deck building video about like standardization and whatnot. I'm gonna have that in the description. Basically, I'm gonna have a lot of links in the description, so check those out if you're interested. Yeah, if you like this video or you like learned anything from it, please leave a like, share it with your friends, and you know, help me out. This has been Darkslayer from Haltesia Gaming. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.